My husband left me for his assistant, then sued me for alimony because I ruined his career. I was holding the thick, cream-colored envelope in my trembling hands, wondering how on earth my life had come to this point. Just 6 months ago, I was a devoted wife, cooking dinner for my husband when he came home late from work. I would wait patiently in the living room, half watching some random TV show while listening for the sound of his key in the lock. Now here I was, reading a court summons that declared he was suing me for damages, for supposedly ruining his career, and he was demanding alimony on top of that. The sheer absurdity made my head spin. The same man who had walked out on me for his younger assistant was now claiming I owed him compensation for the downfall of his professional reputation. None of it made any sense. I had lost him, our marriage, my sense of security, and yet somehow I was the one under attack. It felt like a twisted nightmare I couldn't wake from. I sat down on the sofa, the same one where he'd kissed me the day we bought this apartment. My gaze fell on the empty bookshelf across from me, where many of his work-related texts and binders used to stand in neat rows. When he moved out, he took those first, as though his professional life mattered more than everything else we had ever shared. In a way, it always had, though I only truly realized that later. My heart began to pound so loudly I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I should have seen it coming. I should have connected all the small hints, the late nights, the slight shift in his tone when he talked about his brilliant right-hand woman, the forced cheerfulness he displayed when I asked him how his day went. But I'd been too trusting, too naive, believing our marriage would always be safe. That first evening after he left, I sat on the kitchen floor, hugging my knees to my chest in complete disbelief. We had known each other for almost a decade and been married for 6 years. It had all started with so much promise. He was a bright young associate at a prominent law firm, and I was running a small online business selling handcrafted items. We were in love, truly, passionately, and I thought we would have the perfect life together. I was so proud of him, even when he worked long hours, because I believed in his potential. Whenever I watched him put on his crisp suits or organize his files, I felt an odd sense of admiration that my husband was a man going somewhere. He used to smile at me in the mornings and say, "I couldn't do any of this without you." I remember vividly the day he mentioned his new assistant, Katya. We were sitting at the dinner table, and he was explaining how much his workload had increased because of a new high-profile case. He said they'd assigned him a dedicated assistant to manage his calendar, help research precedents, and handle client communications. "She's really good," he told me enthusiastically, finishing a plate of pasta. "She's organized, ambitious. I'm actually relieved the firm brought her on board. Might help me maintain my sanity." I tried not to let the flicker of jealousy spark inside me. We had never had an issue with trust, and I prided myself on not being that suspicious wife who rummages through her husband's phone or snoops into his emails. So I simply smiled and said, "That's great, honey. I hope she makes your life a little easier." But something in the way he described her, how he lingered a bit too long on the word ambitious, gave me a tiny shiver of apprehension. Then I brushed it away as silly. My husband was a professional, and so was she. I told myself I was imagining things. In the weeks that followed, I saw small changes. He started receiving more texts late at night, and he would chuckle or smile at his phone in a way that made me feel left out. When I asked him about it, he said it was just Katya sending an update about tomorrow's schedule or an interesting article related to their case. He looked at me with mild surprise, as though I was the one making a big deal out of nothing. "You know I have to be on top of things," he said. "She's just helping me get the right info." He would kiss me on the forehead, saying, "I love you," and then roll over to go to sleep. But in my gut, I sensed that his words didn't carry the same warmth anymore. I had the first real confirmation of my fears at a firm-sponsored dinner event. It was a formal gathering where attorneys and their spouses mingled with clients and senior partners. I was wearing a long, dark green dress that night, trying to look elegant, but also feeling a bit insecure next to all these high-powered people. My husband introduced me to some of his colleagues with the same proud tone as always. Then in breezed Katya, younger than I expected, mid-20s at most, with striking confidence in her posture. She wore a sleek black cocktail dress that clung to her figure, and her eyes lit up when she saw my husband. "Maxime," she said, stepping forward to greet him. She didn't acknowledge me until he made a point of introducing me. "Katya, this is my wife." She turned to me, gave a small, polite smile, and said, "I've heard so much about you." Though I tried to be gracious, I felt a coldness radiating from her that belied the superficial pleasantries. Throughout the evening, I couldn't help noticing the subtle looks and glances they exchanged when they thought no one else was watching. Once, when I emerged from the restroom, I glimpsed them talking by the bar, standing too close, Katya whispering something that made him laugh in a way I hadn't seen him laugh in months. My stomach twisted, and I felt an immediate wave of nausea. I did my best to smile for the rest of the event, but my heart pounded in my chest. Later that night in the car, I asked him in a soft voice, "Are you sure there's nothing going on between you two?" He shot me an annoyed glance. "Don't be ridiculous. I told you she's just my assistant." Yes, that was the moment I realized I was too afraid to press further. I didn't want to be that wife. I didn't want to be the one who made a scene or destroyed the trust in our marriage. So I clung to my denial, ignoring the gnawing feeling that I was losing him. Yet denial has a short shelf life. The truth eventually cornered me in the most unexpected and painful way. He had left his phone charging on the kitchen counter one morning while taking a shower. A message popped up with a preview on the locked screen, and I happened to glance over. It was from Katya, something about last night being amazing and how she was thinking about him. My hands went ice cold. I stared at that phone, feeling betrayal envelop me like a suffocating blanket. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, but the text was crystal clear. The look on his face when I confronted him was all the confirmation I needed. He didn't even bother with a genuine apology. Instead, he leaped into anger, accusing me of spying on him, telling me I had no right to pick up his phone in the first place. That quickly morphed into him blaming me for driving him away by not trusting him enough. The irony was so thick I couldn't even muster words for a moment. I was drowning in shock and heartbreak. Within 2 weeks, he moved out. One afternoon, I came home to find half his clothes gone and a short note on the dining table that read, "I need space. Let's talk about it when we're calmer." My eyes burned, and my chest felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. How did we go from planning vacations together to him writing me a cold, detached note? For the first days after his departure, I existed in a fog. My parents tried to call, but I couldn't even answer. I had to explain to clients of my small business why their shipments might be delayed because I was so emotionally disoriented I could barely concentrate. I hardly slept, lying awake at night replaying his angry accusations. I couldn't stop picturing his moments with her, how he must have touched her, how he might have whispered the same sweet things he once whispered to me. It tore me apart. When I finally mustered the courage to reach out and ask if we could talk face to face, he agreed, but set the meeting at a cafe near his office. He arrived in a sharp suit, looking like everything was normal, while I wore an old cardigan and had dark circles under my eyes. He said he was sorry things turned out this way, that he didn't plan for it to happen. It was an accident, he claimed. We just clicked. I felt something was missing, and Katya understands my ambitions in a way you never did. That last sentence was like a dagger. I had always been supportive. I'd endured countless nights alone, stifling my own needs so he could pursue his career. How dare he say I never understood? But he didn't want to hear my perspective. He told me he'd started the paperwork for divorce and that we should try to do it amicably. Then he left some money on the table for the coffee, as if I were a stranger he had just bumped into. I felt simultaneously furious and gutted. I wanted to scream at him or chase after him, or do anything that would break through this icy wall he had put up. But I stayed there, staring into my latte until the foam dissipated and the tears began to blur my vision. In the weeks that followed, I tried to pick up the pieces. I talked to a lawyer friend, asked about the divorce process, and began thinking about dividing our assets. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a rolling wave of sadness and anger. I started to imagine that maybe once everything was settled, I could at least move on. Yes, I was betrayed, but I wasn't going to let it define me forever. I was determined to stand on my own feet and rebuild my life. That's when the unthinkable happened. The letter arrived on a Monday, a formal notice indicating he had filed a lawsuit against me. He was claiming that my reaction to his affair, my behavior, my supposed public defamation, and emotional instability had caused him professional harm. He wanted alimony and damages. I remember reading that letter again and again, convinced there must be some misunderstanding. It alleged that I had spread rumors about him at his workplace, that I had tried to damage his relationships with clients, and that as a result, his reputation took a hit, leading to lost income. But I hadn't contacted anyone at his firm. I barely knew them, aside from a handful of social gatherings. I had no idea how to process the betrayal upon betrayal. He had destroyed our marriage, and now he was attempting to make me pay him for it. In the eyes of the law, apparently one could make such outrageous claims. And if I didn't fight back, a judge might take them at face value. My first reaction was pure panic. I knew lawsuits, especially ones that involved an established attorney, could get nasty. He would have a team of colleagues or perhaps even represent himself. The letter threatened that he would bring forward evidence of my mental instability, that he might have text messages or emails to twist into something they weren't. My mind spun. Had I written him some desperate messages after he left? Of course I had. I poured out my heartbreak, pleaded with him to come back. said some angry words in the heat of the moment. Were those now going to be used against me? I felt so powerless, like he could manipulate the truth to paint me as the problem. Desperate, I contacted a real divorce attorney recommended by a mutual friend. He was an older man, fatherly, who gave me a sympathetic look as I described the situation. He asked me point blank if I had done anything to sabotage my husband's career. No, I whispered, my eyes filling with tears. He was everything to me. I would never do that. The lawyer sighed. Sometimes people make these claims to deflect responsibility. Let's see what they've got, but we'll build our own case. You can fight this. That was the first glimmer of hope I'd felt in ages. A small sense that maybe I wasn't just a helpless victim in his twisted game. Over the next few weeks, I collected every piece of evidence I could find. Copies of his text messages, emails from his firm's HR, which showed no complaint had ever been filed by me, phone logs, and receipts that proved I had never even contacted certain clients of his. My lawyer told me it might become a lengthy process, especially if my husband insisted on pushing these allegations. I became a recluse, barely leaving the house except to gather more documents or to meet with my legal counsel. I stopped updating my online business pages because I couldn't focus. My nights were tormented by nightmares of facing a judge and being found guilty of a fictional wrongdoing. The injustice of it all threatened to swallow me whole. Meanwhile, I heard from mutual acquaintances that he had indeed suffered some setbacks at work. A key client apparently felt uneasy about the rumored office affair. There were whisperings that maybe he'd been reckless, or that he'd crossed professional lines by dating an assistant who reported to him. Perhaps that was enough to cool some of his clients' enthusiasm for working with him. But that was hardly my doing. He had chosen his path. Still, he intended to pin his misfortunes on me, painting me as a vindictive wife trying to tear down his success. It was so brazen and so cruel that I couldn't wrap my head around how the man I loved had become this stranger, willing to see me destroyed. My few close friends rallied around me. My best friend Anya insisted on coming over every weekend, bringing groceries and a determination to distract me if only for a couple of hours. She reminded me of happier times, of silly escapades we shared before I was married. But behind her attempts to lighten my mood, I saw her concern. She worried I was sinking too deep into my sorrow and fear. One evening, I broke down sobbing in front of her. What if the court believes him? What if they think I'm at fault? She put her arms around me and said, "Then we'll fight it. You have the truth on your side." I clung to those words, hoping truth really would prevail. The court date finally arrived, a gray, rainy morning that matched the dread in my heart. I walked into the courthouse with my lawyer at my side, trying not to tremble. My husband was there, wearing a smooth, confident expression, as though this was just another case he intended to win. Katya sat behind him, dressed in a smart skirt suit, her face as unreadable as his. When the session began, his side presented their allegations, that I had slandered him to prospective clients, circulated rumors about his personal life to damage his credibility, and so on. I felt my stomach churning, listening to these lies. I forced myself not to let tears well up because I wanted to appear composed, stable, the opposite of what they were portraying. Then it was our turn. My lawyer carefully dissected each claim one by one. He revealed that I had never made contact with the supposed prospective clients. He showed email headers proving that someone else entirely had sent certain messages from an account with a suspiciously similar name to mine, but which was traced back to an IP address I had never used. My mind reeled. Was that him or Katya orchestrating some sort of setup? It looked that way. My lawyer submitted phone records showing I had made no calls to any of those individuals. He emphasized my lack of motive. Why would she, after being cheated on, risk further emotional damage to her own well-being by orchestrating a revenge campaign? There's no logic here. I sat there, my heart pounding, as the hearing turned in my favor. My husband, usually so smooth, began to frown as more contradictions came to light. I could see a flicker of frustration cross his face. He tried to argue that I had posted defaming statements online, but the so-called screenshots he produced were easily debunked by a forensics expert who found they had been edited. The only thing I had ever posted was a vague lament on my personal page about heartbreak. No details, no accusations. By the time we wrapped up, it was clear that his case was built on flimsy evidence, if not outright fabrication. I can't describe the relief flooding my entire body when the judge dismissed his suit and refused to grant the alimony or damages he was requesting. It felt like I could breathe again for the first time in months. My husband stood there, rigid and pale, while his assistant stared at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. I'd always wondered if she had a conscience. Perhaps at that moment she realized how far he was willing to go, and just what kind of man he truly was. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant, but mostly I just felt exhausted and numb. Later that afternoon, my lawyer told me that once the divorce was finalized, I could truly put this behind me. "You did well," he said. "Sometimes telling the truth and having documentation is enough, but your composure also helped." I gave him a faint smile, grateful that at least in this instance justice prevailed. I had no illusions that it would erase the memories or the pain of betrayal, but it was a tangible victory. I wouldn't have to pay him. I wouldn't have to live in fear of further legal action. I was free to move on, even if moving on felt a little scary and unknown. In the days that followed, I went through a mix of emotions: anger that I'd had to go through all this turmoil, sadness for the love I had lost, and a growing sense of pride that I hadn't simply rolled over and let him ruin me. I began cleaning out the apartment, packing up old photos and souvenirs from our travels together. Some I couldn't bear to look at. Others made me smile through tears. I donated some of his clothes that he never bothered to pick up. I wanted nothing of his left in my space. Friends started inviting me out again, urging me to seize this fresh start. At first, I resisted. The heartbreak was still too raw. But slowly, I allowed myself small pleasures: a cup of coffee at the local cafe, a walk by the river, a visit to a new art exhibit. I realized that for so long, my world had revolved around supporting him. I had stifled my own interests, given up opportunities, and made excuses for him. Now that I had no choice but to be on my own, I started rediscovering my passions. One Sunday, I unearthed my old painting supplies from the closet. I had once loved painting, back before life got too busy. I set up a small easel near the window and spent the morning making a messy, colorful, abstract piece. It felt cathartic to just let my emotions swirl on the canvas. I listened to music, sipped tea, and realized that I hadn't felt that free in years. The tears I shed that afternoon were not just from pain, but also from a sense of release. The life I had known was gone, but in its place, something new was forming. Something that belonged entirely to me. I continued with my online store, adding a new section for custom designs that reflected my personal artwork. Orders trickled in, and each sale gave me a small rush of hope. I'd lost my husband, but I hadn't lost myself. Yes, part of me was scarred by betrayal, but I was still capable of creating beauty, of giving to others. In time, I might even open my heart again. For now, I was content just proving to myself that I could stand without him. Our final divorce hearing was a mere formality. He signed the papers, not meeting my eyes. Katya wasn't there, and I didn't ask why. Maybe she'd seen what kind of man she was with, or maybe they were still together. It didn't matter. When it was all done, he paused in the corridor, perhaps expecting me to say something, but I just picked up my purse and walked away. I thought of all the times we'd laughed, of the promises we'd made, of the nights we'd spent talking about our future. It was all behind me now, another life. I stepped out of the courthouse, took a deep breath of crisp air, and felt the sun on my face. The next few months were about healing. I went to therapy, learned how to accept that I had been powerless over his choices, but still responsible for how I responded. There were still bad days when I felt the sting of his betrayal, when I woke up from a dream thinking he was beside me, only to remember the reality. But there were also good days. A new client praising my creative designs, a friend inviting me to a concert, the first time I actually laughed out loud without forcing it. I focused on gratitude. Grateful that I had found the strength to fight his outrageous lawsuit. Grateful that I had a support system, and grateful that I had not lost sight of who I was. Sometimes I looked at the now empty bookshelf where all his legal volumes stood and imagined filling it with something meaningful. Books on art, design, self-improvement, maybe even volumes of poetry. I could transform that shelf from a reminder of him into a testament to my personal growth. I promised myself I would never again let someone else's ambitions overshadow my own. I promised I would speak up if I ever felt sidelined or disrespected. And I promised I would live my life fully, unafraid to pursue the things that brought me joy. I still have moments when I think about how easily he twisted the situation to blame me for his downfall. I wonder if he truly believes his own accusations. But it no longer consumes me. He's a chapter that's closed. A cautionary tale about how people can become strangers when their own ego and pride are on the line. I've found a certain peace in knowing I stood up for myself. I spoke my truth, proved my innocence, and came out stronger on the other side. Sometimes, late at night, I remember the early days of our marriage, when we were both brimming with excitement about the future. I mourn the loss of that ideal, but I accept it was an illusion. People grow in different directions, and sometimes they let their darkest traits rule them. I could have let it make me bitter, but I chose to learn from it and move forward. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see someone who's been through devastation but refused to be destroyed by it. I see a woman who took all the hurt, betrayal, and injustice and still managed to come out with her dignity intact. He took so much from me, but he never took my capacity for hope. And in the quiet of my apartment, which feels like a sanctuary now rather than a lonely place, I know that my life is, at last, truly my own.